Well, welcome to people who've joined us again, live on the web. We're looking at Calvert, which is a site that's based in America, a participatory site to which people contribute photographs and stories. And we're currently looking at a photograph. Can people see things from it, or are they just listening?
No, we can see it.
The photograph is there, and the story that's attached to it underneath is in a kind of poetic form here, the Johnson County Range Wall.
Is that put up by the same person who put up the dolphins? It's by William again.
Is it? Well, that's completely coincidental.
Yeah.
It could be. Yeah, worth checking out.
It's the same picture of the man.
Let's just see by scrolling. We should be able to see by scrolling down. I think
In the story, it's the same William.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Well, he's got two of these.
What you've got here is people experimenting with form in a web-based way, using what's available to them. You may like it or you may not like it. I mean, for those of us that, like David and I, who have a big knowledge of digital story, I'm sure there are others in the room, somehow the absence of sound is a bit of I find a bit of a challenge in this. But on the other hand, it aesthetically pares it down and it makes you link with the words in particular sorts of way, which is useful and interesting too. So, you know, I'm not offering you these things as an example of all that's good about the web or anything. I'm just trying to outline a little bit about where I think these creativities are and suggest to you that they're in a new place.
You mentioned earlier about the blurring or the difference between the amateur and the employee, I think your words were. I think into that mix you bring in the freelance person who isn't an employee but works for other people at times and works in a third sort of way. So that's quite an important mix, and there is a growth of freelancers, of people being self-employed. And sometimes self-employed people work for nothing and appear to be amateurs, but they're not because they call themselves professional. And it brings into play all those things about exchange and value, which aren't financial always.
Absolutely. And I think lots of people who participate in web-based activity like this are possibly people for whom their paid work is they find quite restrictive. You know, we work with orchestral musicians at one point, and I asked them how creative they found the process, and almost all of them said not at all, because they're told what to do by conductors. They're told what to play. It's not. They find it a productive experience, but not particularly creative from their own point of view. They were creative when they were working in primary schools with groups of children and young people, perhaps playing music that they'd written themselves and so on, rather than in the orchestral context. So there are some surprises around, you know, jobs that people have, and I think people are engaging with this who are journalists, but for whom the journalistic project doesn't give them this kind of outlet, if you can see what I mean. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's the volunteer and the professional, the amateur and the professional. There's the volunteer and the employee, the amateur and the professional is at the heart of this for me. And that freelance position is very interesting. Well, we're all becoming freelancers. I mean, when I was at school, the story was, if you work hard and you get a degree, you'll have a job for life. And it turned out to be true, in my case. I'm nearly at the end of it now, so I can say that with certainty. However, for most of the young people who are in the university here today, that is definitely not the case. They'll have series of careers, they'll have serial careers and serial identities and serial selves. And a lot of that will relate to their work that they do and creativity they have through new technology. So, you know, the world has changed absolutely, and people don't have those old certainties anymore.
And I think as a freelancer you have a portfolio of things that you do. You don't do just one thing.
No.
But you also have a portfolio of presence on the web now, don't you? I mean, you seem to be saying in a way that this is one step on from a blog, because a lot of employed people, but also self-employed people, will blog as an adjunct to the work. So you offer some of your knowledge and experience in a blog, partly as a showcase, partly as a sort of lost leader in a way. But then there's also this potential that seems to be being showcased here of being able to be more creative. I mean, maybe it's just coincidence that we've got William, who is poetic, who's writing poetry and showing us pictures of dolphins. But that seems to be a creative outlet that isn't quite so career directed as a blog might be.
Let's have an open. That's what I really want. I don't want.
This is maybe it's a factor of my age, but can I sort of declare a little bit of healthy scepticism here? Whenever I see something like this kind of a project, which is admirable, it's free, and I distrust free a little because of the concept that underpins it of gatekeepers. You referred earlier on to Google and the half a dozen monopolies that underpin the web, and perhaps I'm just naturally suspicious, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. And aside from the creative aspect, the artistic aspect of this, somebody's offering this for free for a reason, and I don't think society has yet begun to explore what that reasoning is. There's some, if they're not making money out of it, they're collecting the information. Maybe that's paranoia. But you know,
I think a lot of people do offer things for free with no monetary recompense. I think there are more people, and that's saying there's no such thing as a free lunch. I'm not sure that it's entirely true, because I know a lot of people who do things for free, and there are other rewards that I said before. There are other rewards, but it's not financial. But they are still doing it for free.
Yeah, they're not software companies, not usually.
But I think there are other. They're offering it, but I think there are people who are involved with it who are offering it for free.
Yes. I think that the challenge comes in how the big processes work, how the Googles and the Microsofts and so on work in relation to this. But there's no doubt in my mind that in the web as it was originally envisaged by Tim Berners-Lee, that was about free communicative action, and that to a large extent has happened. There are still threats and difficulties and problems. And interestingly, I don't think that they are ones that will be dealt with outside the context of the web. I think the web will cure itself in that sense. That's another thing that we keep looking for organisational, political, or whatever moves to be made to solve these problems.
Sorry to interrupt. We're being asked for a resume of who's attending the session today. Now that we're on the web, would it be useful just to quickly go around the table again? Tell us who's here and where you're from.
Yes, do you mind doing that? That's right. Well, Hamish Fife from University of Glamorgan and also Chair of Voluntary Arts Network Wales.
Alan Davis, Welsh Government Arts Department. Roland Thomas from the Arts Council of Wales. John Smith from Voluntary Arts.
Greg Roberts, Wales Development Manager for Making Music.
Evan Dawson, Head of Programmes and Development for Making Music.
Gwenna Davies, Voluntary Arts Wales.
Siobhan Best, Project Officer for Voluntary Arts Wales.
Daniel Carpenter, Voluntary Arts.
Guy Roderick, Development Manager for Gwen Theatre.
Sally Lemsford, Freelance Artist from Derbyshire.
Pamela Butler, Arts Development Officer from Chesterfield Borough Council.
Phil Thomas, the Artistic Director of the Granary Festival of Arts for Older People.
David Chamberlain, Arts Development Manager for Curry County Borough Council.
And I'm Robin Simpson, the Chief Executive of Voluntary Arts.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think the internet isn't a decoration to society; it's a challenge to society. It's not a pleasure tool. It's problematic. It's troublesome. It's difficult, but it's happening. And I suppose my thinking this afternoon was to try to engage my head with the ways, because my particular responsibility here is around the Voluntary Arts Network family of creative activity. What are some of the implications of all this for the work we do? Because that heartfulness, that freedom that you're talking about, sorry, I've forgotten your name. Sally was talking about, where people do give things for free, the bell ringing is a habit of the heart. bell ringing is a habit of the heart, in the sense that people do it because they're interested in it, because they love it, because they want to do it. They don't do it for money. Occasionally there may be some income to the organisation as a result of it. People aren't engaged with it because they want to make a career out of it, or they see themselves, or they see their future as being with it. It occupies a particular part of their life, which is not that professional part of their life. And so it's in those areas of concern that I'm wondering what the link is, in a sense, between this and this proliferation of activity that's going on the World Wide Web. I'm going to finish shortly and hand it over to a wider discussion. But I was wondering why, a question in a sense, it's a very hard question, why has group action largely been limited to formal organisations in the past? You'd say to an organisation, if you want to go forward in your interests, get a constitution, get a membership, link with the Welsh Government, all these things will be good for you. You can't move forward unless you have all these things in place. These are not organisations in that sense. They represent activity that people engage with, that people feel identity as a result of. But the question is, I suppose, why has it been necessary to organise in the ways that we've organised to date? And the second question is, what's happening now to change that? Are there transitions that are occurring that are actually making the kind of work we do profoundly different from what it was in the past? That's hard, isn't it? So, over to you. You've got 10 minutes. Anybody else got any? Anybody who hasn't spoken yet got any comments, questions?
Before I comment on the ways of working, I know that it comes back to the kind of having free websites as well. I know that I think it's East Sussex or West Sussex down south in the neighbouring county. They develop websites and they've got all the artists and the movers and shakers engaged in the website, and they started collaborating online with the work, and also they built the audience as well that respond to kind of all the arts activities and events that's going on. And they've got that critical mass where they've got like 20,000 people hitting on a regular basis. So that's the point. They introduce the kind of advertising, which keeps that website free. But what the people, the arts development team has done since setting that up is almost step back and just let the kind of arts community develop their own activity, and then it frees them up to develop other art forms and do other things, really. So it's kind of empowered the arts community. There's more arts activity going on. It's built the audience, and it's still a free website. So, but they've done an initial kind of seed funding to develop the groups in the first place, and kind of carry it on from there.
We've got a question online. Does the new amateur see him or herself as such, or do they just view themselves as an unpaid professional in waiting?
I wish we had more, new amateurs with us, really, in that sense. Well, any response to that?
I'm not sure that amateurs label themselves amateurs. And I'm not sure that, I guess professionals label themselves as professionals, but I'm not sure that amateurs put that label on themselves.
Yeah. At some stage, any professional must have been a non-professional. Whether we call them amateurs or...
But that's an external person calling them amateur. What do they call themselves?
At the beginning, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, whenever. When it simply starts.
But you seem to be talking in a straight continuum, whereas we're all amateurs. We're here as a professional. We're probably an amateur bell ringer or an amateur gardener.
What I'm saying is,
so we're all both.
Somebody's termed themselves a professional. At some stage, there must have been a non-professional. There must have been an amateur.
Maybe so, but I'm not sure that those labels.
I agree with the question you raised, what they actually mean, but in terms of the discussion we're having, we're using amateur.
I think people drop between the two, and a professional, when they're not actually working, will go back to work with the amateur dramatic group, so they can be both, really. So it's a grey area.
There's a long history to this discussion about amateur and professional, and some of it is around a pastime. The notion that people make a living out of one thing, and another thing that they do is a pastime. And there are also pejorative overtones to the difference in quality sometimes between the profession. People say, let's make this as professional as we can. But of course we all know also that that's not an absolutely given rule. Sometimes the amateur can exceed the creativity and the success of the professional in a variety of different ways for a lot of different reasons. But a lot of it seems to come down to how you make a living, in a sense, whether you call yourself a professional. And also whether the organisation the profession is organised in particular sorts of ways to be inclusive and exclusive. I think what's happening with the web is the web is pushing at those definitions because it's including anybody in this process. So if you take broadcast media, for example, that is a process that most definitely had a profession, and that you were either in or you were out. I mean, nobody was making amateur television programs because you couldn't without the resources. What's changed is now you can. Nobody was writing their own symphonies without having them performed perhaps by professional orchestras. Now you kind of can. So things that in a sense, that's where I'm coming from about the mixture of these definitions, rather than getting too concerned about. I'm also interested, actually, in the way that organisations exclude as well as include, because a lot of the professional activity has been more concerned with excluding people than it has been with including people within its structures. And this is inclusive activity, I think.
Isn't that another aspect, an important aspect, that the web, although it can be judgmental, starts off by being totally non-judgmental. If I have a photograph that I think is brilliant, I can put it out there for everyone to see. I don't have to enter a competition to get the problem that says I'm an ace photographer. I just put it out there. I might get adverse comments, but everybody is getting exposure, whatever their level of professionalism as an amateur.
Guy, have you got any views on this?
No, I've been struggling with the whole chestnut amateur and professional for a long time because I've worked with some groups who would call themselves amateur because that's the given term. They've produced some stuff that others would regard as professional standards, and vice versa. No, not so.
Is it possible that there's a continuum of professionalism, so that somebody who might be working as a professional photographer could put their personal stuff on Flickr or on their Facebook page? On the other hand, somebody who's an amateur could graduate from Flickr to, there are much more professional photography websites. Anybody can go on Flickr, but there are websites where you go to look for a professional photographer, and those people showcase their work with watermarking, so you can't reproduce it. So you have to engage them and pay them. So there's a kind of continuum where a person might be an amateur and they might be up there on a professional website and might also be on Flickr, and you can reverse it completely.
Sorry, I'm going on the same way. I'm actually working with young people at the moment, and what I'm hoping to do is actually try and find ways of getting more young people to engage with their creativity. And I think there is a perception of the professional end of any kind of creativity, which I think in some ways disenfranchises or puts young people off engaging with their creativity because there's some kind of benchmark or some kind of accreditation that justifies or not what is, in a sense, an innate creativity. I think it'd be nice in terms of what we do with what is available to us now in terms of much broader boundaries to actually do away with that and actually use the broad canvas where anybody is encouraged to explore their creativity, to find a way of actually enabling, particularly for young people, I'm not losing my words here, but that they feel justified and comfortable in being able to be creative without being judged, I suppose. And that's what I'm interested about this coming here today.
But how does that sit? How does that sit with the culture, particularly among young people, but not just among young people, where the whole celebrity thing that is kind of all pervasive in our media nowadays, where they actually, some of them want to be put forward, they want to go into competitions, they want to be X-factored and judged, and they still want recognition among their peers, I suppose, in that way, but they don't want formal recognition. They just want to be famous. They just want to be known for something.
Yeah. I understand that. Is what we're talking about potential to at least offer a platform, a broader platform, than currently exists?
Yeah. And the web does that.
And I think, from what I'm seeing, I think people are doing it.
Yeah.
What we're needing to do is catch up with what people are already doing. To harness it and bring our experience to bear on that in order to facilitate young people and actually pushing their values of creativity and understanding the media that they're actually using at the moment.
The point just been made on the web here about could there become a two-tier amateur sector where there's an increasing divide between the tech-savvy, possibly younger people, and more traditional groups facing dwindling membership? More traditional groups whose membership is dwindling.
Yeah.
Is there a split even within the amateur part of the sector? It goes back to what you were saying.
And the age thing as well. I mean, speaking as one who works exclusively with older people, there's a real danger here of a divide happening at some arbitrary point in the age sort of spectrum where we just don't do that stuff. That's a young thing. Or Twitter is a case in point. Guilty. I don't do Twitter. Nobody's yet convinced me of the point of it. That's my problem, not Twitter's. But it's an example of something where there's a pretty clear age divide amongst the people who do and the people who don't.
But isn't actually the web ageless in that you don't know how old somebody is who does it? Whereas if you go and sit in a room with somebody, you do know, and those prejudices are really apparent. But on the web, it's much harder to work out.
Yeah, I'm only speaking from the other end of things, working with the old people that I work with. They don't engage with that as much as younger people, or even, dare I say, middle-aged people who are beginning to now. I mean, it's the old thing like 50s to me 40 or whatever. People who are promising.
There are always going to be some types of groups or art forms where you need to physically come together. Perhaps you mentioned theatre earlier, and I think there's an interesting question about how you convert people who've come together online into a group to actually leave the room, put the screen aside, and come and meet physically. And in the amateur music world, we've seen quite a few choirs and orchestras and community music groups who have done that successfully, but they're few and far between. I'd be interested to know if people have a view about what are effective ways of doing that, or if that's a useful thing to be doing anymore.
It's anecdotal, but I think it's interesting. It's something I wanted to pursue. I'm working with a group of young people who are currently in rehearsals for Midsummer Night's Dream. When they're having coffee breaks, they're talking about flash mobs, which is a way where people, a group of strangers will get together to create sometimes some wonderful stuff. You've only met or haven't actually met, physically until they turn up to do stuff. And again, this is why I'm here again, because I think it's an opportunity for engaging more young people.
Touching on the idea of being physically present to take part in the arts and crafts, there's a question online which says, how do your speakers suggest a group encourages participation from people who are rurally dispersed? That's particularly relevant for rural Wales. Any online or cloud technology recommendations for remote working or sharing? Anybody can suggest?
Well, I think people need to be connected, and I think one of the big problems in Wales is that the broadband rollout hasn't really happened as much as it should have done. That's my feeling about it, not as quick as it has, but it will. And I would have thought that there are interesting instances. There's a big movement in America called stay-at-home moms. And stay-at-home moms are the most unlikely group of people you would have thought ever to engage with the web. But their sets of concerns have been represented on the web by now millions of, presumably younger women in America who are stay-at-home moms. And by definition, they should be staying at home, but in actual fact, they've used it to set up a whole national structure around getting together to share their problems and issues. They lobby the Congress. They're all sorts of. It's a movement.
Well, we've got Mumsnet.
There's Mumsnet.
Exactly. Hasn't the Prime Minister been to see them?
Yeah. People are aware. So coming back to the business about rural connectivity, I would have thought that the internet is a very good way to establish common interests and common sense, some common sets of purposes, and to join people with common interests across distance. It's always been expensive to bring people together, and that's one of the impediments against the process of communion, in a sense, that it's expensive to get people together. But actually, what I'm suggesting is once the urgency is great enough, once the feeling that we need to do this is strong enough, people will do it. And they'll do it whatever their age. But going back to an email, when I can remember when there weren't any computers, we didn't have them. And I remember when people used to get faxes and run around the building saying, the faxes are right, but it was a boy thing, the whole computing malarkey, because it was to do with maths. And for a long time it was a boy thing. I think it still is in some senses. But what changed it was email. And women around me discovered that you could communicate with people through this process. It wasn't just about solving hard sums quickly or doing some scientific process. It was actually about communication, about people. And they became involved, and they began to communicate with each other. And once people have a reason to communicate, and they can see that there's a purpose in this, then they will do it. I mean, people, even in the demographics, even in the older demographics, if people, they need help to do it. I mean, that's a challenge, and the digital inclusion activity that's going on with a varying degree of success is attempting to help. But I think that once people have a need to talk to their grandchildren in Australia through Skype or whatever else it is, they will find a way to do it. There's nothing innately stupid about people who are older or anything. That they will do it, but what they need is a purpose. And in a sense, a lot of the organisations I know that Voluntary Arts works with, not exclusively, but a lot of them do engage with that older demographic. And it would seem to me that the communication through the web is a prime potential methodology for dealing with digital inclusion. And not that I want to add digital inclusion to our list of things that we need to be delivering, but it's there.
You've been criticised here, Hamish, about your generalising. Plenty of women like maths and science, plenty of men like communication.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Of course they do. But it was the communicative. Let's leave the women out of that then. But it was just when more people became interested in the process because of its potential for communication, and that's what's hooked people into the web and continues to hook them now, I think.
Go back to the age thing, you said about people engage with the internet. I know they did some work down in the south of England with a museum service where the numbers have been dropping off. And what they did, I mean, people engage with the internet. Older people tend to look on laptops, online, whatever. Whereas younger people use smartphones. You shrink the whole website down to the smartphone, can't read the text. And I noticed that they were looking at Facebook online, where the text is being quite large on the screens. So what they did, they would redevelop the website so that all the information is really big text, easy to read, and then the audience numbers for the events at the museums rose. So that maybe there's a trick there with some of the other more traditional groups. Maybe they can look at how they can redesign the web services to attract young audiences. By going down that kind of smartphone route, because it's the proven technique that works.
That question was asked earlier on about rural groups. We did a project earlier this year, where we made music available, traditional music, copyright available online, which people then download and come to a central event. So we put MIDI files online. They could learn the music in advance at home, and then come to the central event and perform it together with others. So that's one way that people could sort of reach out to others and offer them the chance to engage with them.
That's a sort of similar model to a flash mob, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the big dance used for the Olympic dance. I've been struggling to think, as an arts officer, of a project where we, as arts officers, have tried to set up a project where people engage collaboratively and creatively online. And I can't think of one. We use the internet all the time for getting people together, for publicising, for keeping them informed, and maybe batting some notes or information around, and telling people when the next meeting is. But I can't actually personally think of a creative collaboration online that we have set up. which is quite an interesting area of lack, isn't it?
It is interesting. I mean, I think some of the most successful websites like Flickr are predicated on one thing alone, and that is sharing. So if there is already established a common interest, all you do is you put up a website that's all the crochet makers of Great Britain can contribute. Yes, can contribute photographs. There's no qualitative structure, there's no organisational structure imposed on that. It's just there for you to see. It's a resource, and at some level, engagement on that basis is very simple. It doesn't have to have an organisational purpose or intention. It's just a sharing.
But isn't there a difference between sharing and collaborating?
Yes, huge difference. But I'm not proposing one as opposed to the other. What I'm saying is that one way of engaging people with particular. I mean, for instance, the thing about the crochet thing simply because somebody had started a recent meeting we had at Voluntary Arts Network. There's one person left alive in Great Britain who can crochet a particular way, and she's she won't be there for forever. And the immediate thing is, well, let's save that. Let's archive this material through the web, and let's make it available to others so that they can share it. And the thing is, I mean, it's a natural enough thing. But organisations, which are our key concern, are hard to establish, hard to maintain. They're constrained by a particular set of circumstances that are external to the organisation, that are political or economic or whatever else. But these little web-based activities can add to the organisation, the strength of the organisation, but they may not be organisational in purpose. They may not be specific to membership or expressed interest. You see what I mean?
There's another question online. Laura asks, how much distinction is there in the use of or relevance of digital forms depending on art form? For example, there might be loads of use in music or literature, but not so much in dance. So does it depend on the art form?
I haven't got any easy answers to these questions. I mean, it may do, but I mean, I would have thought that dance is shareable through video and film in interesting sorts of ways on the web. It's not exclusive from the point of view of it being a repository.
She's just adding to that by saying she was thinking of art forms that lend themselves to physical space, whereas others might lend themselves to virtual spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
There was a project that was called, I think it was called Dance for Film, where the dance didn't really work in a physical space, it only worked on film. So that springs to mind.
Yes, I'm only going to say that to a certain extent the whole thing is only limited by your imagination, really. I mean, donkeys years ago, before I became the person I am today, I was once a practicing artist myself, and in the very early days of the use of video, it was all so reel. I was part of a group and we did a live performance interacting with pre-recorded video, and so there's no reason why, in relation to the newer and much slicker digital technology, you couldn't have an interactive live dance performance with pre-recorded dancing. But equally, it could be something that could be developed across the web. Mess Up the Mess Theatre did a brilliant piece, which they're reviving again now, and it's about to go on tour again, called Click. And in terms of the discussions earlier about sort of the relevance of the technology to young people and their use of it. And it was an interactive connection with companies in Hong Kong and New Zealand and Australia, and involved David James as the script writer. But the script was developed in conjunction with young people in all these 4 countries, including Wales, and came together in a performance with young people from Ammanford and Bryn and was all about sort of the illusions and the mistakes and the intricacies of social networking. And it's a wonderful show, and it was acted out entirely by the young people through workshops and things developed with David James and with Mess Up the Mess, and was also through the internet with young people in all these other countries as well, and was performed simultaneously the same period of time in all these 4 countries. So there's a lot of possibilities out there. I mean, I was talking to a group the other day who slightly outside the sphere of the arts who were talking about wanting to set up a museum, and premises were expensive, etc. And in the end, I said, well, why don't you think about a virtual museum? Because everybody has some object that would possibly contribute towards a museum display relevant to their local area or whatever, but doesn't want to part with it. But you can now have a virtual museum that is much less expensive than a real museum. So,
and a lot more accessible.
And a lot more accessible.
There are big challenges to institutions, aren't there? And if you have an online museum, how does the curatorial process work in relation to what you put in and what you don't put in? I mean, the red light and the green light, as far as history is very interesting. I mean, that's an issue for history painters, isn't it? For all these organisations that are dealing with history, is what people are telling us in any way, shape, or form true? Does it matter? Is it verifiable? It's back to the university problem. Set of issues. So there are lots of challenges. In all of that. I've popped this up on the screen here. I don't know whether people outside can see it, but this is about this initiative called The Space, which is a BBC Arts Council of England initiative, which is going to do some of the things it says here. It's a free digital pop-up art service developed by Arts Council of England in partnership with the BBC that could help to transform the way people connect with and experience arts and culture. It's just in the process of being commissioned. And it's available here.
So there's nothing up on it at the moment?
I don't think there is. I'm just looking from the point of view of our... this is not a cheap answer to the question about bands. And I think one of the challenges is how do people develop skills and knowledge and develop their work rather than just share it in this context. Experiments with film and dance and so on are happening, and they have a contribution, to make a web-based contribution, I think. So it's that. Where are we up to? Where are we up to now? Any more questions, Daniel?
Do we have the names of the people watching us? Because they know us.
Who's watching? Okay, at the moment we've got Ecomedia UK, Kevin, Laura Drain, Lindsay, and Tony. They're the ones on chat at the moment, although we've got a few more watching and not taking part in the chat. Okay, there was a question here. Back to the question of the new amateur. Are there any characteristics of this group of people that are not necessarily related to the digital world? For example, are they more likely to commit for a shorter amount of time to projects? And another point was, are they more likely to want to be treated as full partners in projects rather than just contributors?
That's a very, very interesting question. I suppose it relates to what you're saying about the way people work, the actual organisation of their work, the time they have available. One of the great mysteries about high achievement in the amateur arts, for example, seems to be always people say, how do they find the time to do this? How do they find the time to do this? Because it's of such high quality that they must be spending huge amounts of time, and people do. They do it voluntarily, but old ways of work allowed people to have huge spaces of time when they weren't at work from 5 o'clock onwards in most cases, and you just got on with it, and the weekends and so on. But people are working in different sorts of ways. I'm sure that is reflected. That's just a very interesting question. I don't have an easy answer to that. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a contribution there, but I think it's a very important thing. The changes in the digital world are associated with a whole set of cultural changes. My oldest son works as an architect, and he wants to associate himself with new technology wherever it is. He wants to be where the best technology is. He doesn't care whether there's a carpet on the floor or he's going to be the next in succession for promotion, or he really doesn't. He's interested in the job he does in a kind of creative way, I can honestly say. And that affects the way he looks at the time he spends doing what he's doing, and all sorts of aspects, and where he does it as well. He wants to work with the people who have a reputation for doing whatever it is. And the idea of going into a firm and working your way through and starting with a few minor projects and then working it, all of that has gone really. People want to make the fullest contribution they can and be associated with technology and work in flatter organisations with fewer levels of management whom they see as being a kind of an encumbrance really.
Yeah, another thing that occurs to me is that because it's so easy when you're working virtually, when you're online, it's so easy to change. It's one click and you can be looking at something else. Is that going to change change where the quality bar is? If you don't like something, the decision about whether you like it, whether you move to look at something else is going to be. It's easy to do. It's likely to be. You're going to make your judgment sooner rather than later. Is that going to affect? Are we going to allocate the time online to decide whether we like something because it's so easy to switch to something else? I'm thinking of YouTube. We have a YouTube channel for our festival, which we launched last year. It's got a number of things on it, most of which have got viewers in the small hundreds, one of which has got 20,000. Don't ask me why. I don't know, but there's something to do with the way we pick up, the way they cruise, the way they graze through phenomena like YouTube. And is that going to change our perception of what quality is over time? Because we're going to make a decision whether we're going to engage with something much quicker.
And you look at that clip, I mean, you said you can click away. Imagine exactly the same dance piece that's produced there, and this is filmed with track and dollies, with cranes and all the rest of it, with great expense and editing. But you might imagine that people that develop the same dance piece but filmed it without those resources, people might click off it because it doesn't look like it doesn't look.
We've got a related question online. I should just say that last question was from Kyle Hannan, the Managing Director of Ecomedia UK. But a point from Kevin, do you think professional artists are scared that their fragile lifestyle might be threatened by amateurs who are seen as a cheaper alternative? And is this exacerbated by the new digital era?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I'm not being disability. Yes, I do. I think you're right, and I think this is part of the challenge that's set up, by all of this. It needn't be something that destroys people's careers and so on. But there is a sense in which there is a real challenge here to those old structures, and we've got to respond, I suppose, really.
I'll give an example of it, but there was a photographer in London, and 10 years ago there's a big range of photographers working in all different parts of the industry, and he said now the industry is just laid to death, people are just photoshopping down all this stuff, and he said there's a very small bank of photographers which people use on a regular basis, and he's worked as an electrician, and he's worked in the industry for 20 years and advertising, doing fashion shoots going on the road, and he said it's only the top 2 or 3% still doing it. So that industry is being hit specifically by the new medium, the way people kind of get their photographs and images from.
If you send a press release to a news organisation now, it's cut and pasted. It's nobody sub-edits, nobody really changes very much. Those journalistic skills or editing skills, maybe rather than journalistic skills, are and not being pursued in the same way now.
Yeah.
as they were.
But local journalism is dying on its feet, isn't it, really? I mean, there is no editorial process in local journalism left, and there's no campaigning notion or anything else. All I would say about that is that it doesn't take you long to peruse, and I'm beginning to sound like I'm proselytising for the web all the time. I'm not. It's very complicated, difficult, but if you want to find examples of successful campaigns on local levels, look to the web. That's what's happening. So in a sense, those old functions, old professional functions of journalism, which are a proper democratic function, have been given over, in a sense, to the web, and that's how important it is. You know, the process. But then the papers are no longer owned by the Thompsons and those other people, and the ability to control what appears on the web and what doesn't appear on the web is gone. So yeah, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Some people, like a lot of people who have, it's like the printing press argument, David, isn't it really? People say, well, we had all this information, now anybody can get a hold of it. Anybody can read the Bible now, it's terrible. Vicars and priests and that were really upset when translating the Bible into English was a big challenge and a threat. This is one of those moments where the toothpaste is coming out of the tube and it's not going back in. We can. Sorry,
I was going to ask you. It's a point you raised earlier on. There's obviously pressure on amateur groups out there and amateur artists to be IT proficient. And are there groups that are going to sort of fall through the cracks? Those who can't build something sexy out there on the net. What's going to happen to them?
Yeah. For me, it's about interest. I mean, the mass participation potential of the web means that if you go to the crochet example, there are people who crochet in America, and America multiplies everything because of its size. So if people Google crochet and come across this example of this person sharing their crochet skills, it's because of the base of interest that will be taken forward, not because it's done fantastically, exponentially well or anything, but because there's already an interest there, and what you're dealing with is you're dealing with shared and already established common interests. You know what I mean? There's a danger, but what do you do about it? I mean, people have to respond, and I suppose in a sense what I'm asking is how can the organisations we're associated with act as enablers of this process rather than, I hate to say it, possibly obstacles to the process, because institutions find these kinds of things very. I'm speaking from experience at university. The university finds this business of Wikipedia, for example, very challenging because it's done for free. Why bother having universities if the web potential is to get all this new knowledge that way, including medical knowledge and other things? If you did it, if you really worked at it, it could happen. And they become defensive, and they start saying, no, we don't want this, and we're not going to do that, and we're going to stop this, and we're going to use the law against, I mean, you see it with the Twitter, the legal cases involving people twittering. It can't deal with it. You could super injunctions and all the rest of it won't work. That's the reality of the situation. We have to work out how we're going to respond to it, I guess.
And not all amateurs want to do it for money. They do it for a whole raft of reasons why. So that about will professionals feel threatened or feel fragile, I think, and again I like your continuum rather than saying this is amateurs and this is professionals. I think people do things for different reasons, and so you shouldn't feel threatened by it because people will do it in different ways and for different reasons.
I might be wrong, please somebody point me in the right direction on this one, but I do find it interesting. What's happening is that we see things now that are being audience led. Which hadn't used to be, the case. It used to be that there were very few of us. I mean, public hangings were, a big event because it wasn't a light or something, and a lot of people would gather around. But now, it's a phenomenon that hundreds of thousands of people will log on to watch a guy chasing deer. It's like an early stage. It's an early demonstration of what's happening. And what I'm interested in is how we can actually harness this in terms of being able to, for instance, I would prefer my kids not to watch a guy chasing deer, but to watch what we saw earlier on. I didn't know about these two websites. It's actually, rather than just like looking at something banal, but showing up on YouTube, to actually engage with what's happening in order to use our skills in terms of as facilitators to say, look, this is what's happening now, and it is a massive change and good. I like the idea of the fact that it's not just people in the Cambridge footlights that are going to determine what we do and don't see on our main media, and that it's a much broader base of artists, and that it is audiences-led, which I think is going to go cyclical. People will now start to respond to what it is that people are interested in seeing, and that will determine next now what we begin to create if we are going to survive in this new media age. And I do think that we have a really, we're really interestingly placed to be involved in. I can't be prescriptive because I don't know how it's going to work. It's actually the very nature of being engaged in it that's going to be, the interesting next couple of years.
Absolutely.
We might judge what's banal differently in a few years' time.
Of course. I mean, this whole thing about, we were talking earlier on about the definition of what's good stuff, what's not, what we like, what we don't. It's interesting now to see, it's like it's people voting with their feet, isn't it? And you can click off. In the same way I've sat in an audience thinking, I can't leave, but I really, really want to.
But perhaps our obligation as professionals is to keep abreast of things. Our constituency of beneficiaries to the things that suit them best. I mean, go back to crochet. Yeah, I took it up again after many years, and I can never remember how to do it. Now you just go to YouTube, and every single you type in a knitting instruction that you don't understand, or a crochet instruction. There is somebody, and they're usually an American, showing you precisely that move on YouTube. Now to take that further, where people make their knitted creations, and they put them up on, and they're just showing them, and you can have like 5 or 6 versions of the same pattern by a designer, and this is mine in blue, and here's mine in pink, And then to go a step further, there's a site called Etsy.com, where if you make something, I don't know how many of you know about Etsy, but I often post makers in my area to look at Etsy. It's about, it's a site where if you make something, anything creative, you just put it up there and you can sell it. And Etsy, ETSY.com. It's little craft items, often very, very high quality. I mean, it's not Church Bazaar level, but a whole range of things. So you can Google wedding favours if you're having a wedding. Some of those little wedding decorations, and you can buy them. This is, I think, where creative people are starting to come together, because while you may have sites like Ravelry, you've also got the development of things like Knit and Natter. Now, pubs in town, Stitch and Bitch, Knit and Natter, pubs in town are starting to encourage groups to come in the afternoon, because it's bringing people in to somewhere that would just buy an orange juice, you lay on some buns, and you've got people in there.
That's in a sense what I was meaning. The meter element, the physical thing. This isn't about the process that resolves itself around isolation and people doing things on their own and everything else. The need
so I've made this, I want to show you.
And the easement in the meeting up is because there's a third thing present. It's not like me meeting you and saying, how are you? You get the knitting needles out, you talk about what you like, or not, as the case may be, because you're knitting. And it's a very easy social process to be part of. That third thing is what we're talking about here, that the internet provides people with, is that set of common interest. But what I think is this whole process is in its infancy. I mean, television 5 years into television wasn't great television as we would recognise it now in any way, shape, or form. This is something which is just starting, and given what it's already, I am beginning to sound like a prototype now, but given what it's already achieved, there's a sense in which we need to work out how best we can position ourselves to support at least this kind of thing. Daniel, sorry, you've got
a couple of questions coming from around the country. Is the digital era's real challenge the need to successfully connect existing craftspeople with nurturing new ones, so inspiring new ones to come along, or is it just existing people that are carrying out their crafts and art forms online, and is there a good enough connect with the kind of the new people who we want to inspire into these arts and crafts? So that was one question. There's another one, but I'll come back to if you want to.
Anybody
Yeah.
For me, it's to encourage the creativity in everybody. So yeah, it's bringing a craftsperson in everybody, a musician in everybody.
Well, I guess that, to an extent, is the flip side, or one of several flip sides to the question of whether it challenges the professions. Is that those professions who want to teach, there must be a whole new bunch of connections that they can make through this kind of media, and to inspire people to come to them that they might not otherwise be able to do.
And there was another question from Laura Gray. Is there a saying that if your content on the web than somebody else is, how does that play out in the professional amateur art forms and the digital present?
Yeah, well, there are always people around who want to make money out of things, and there are huge issues around intellectual property in all of this. Sharing process. Keep going back to the crochet thing, don't we? Really? But I mean, I guess there is really no money to be made in the web as it's currently configured through sharing how to make crochet objects. You can try and organise it and institutionalise it and sell it if you want to, but since it's already out there and it's free and it's available, you're unlikely to be able to make much money out of it. But I know what you mean. And as I say, I think it's the web, it's the social structures of the web that will deal with those issues rather than anything else that we've got. The law won't do it. Intellectual property is too complicated. And I suspect, since I'm being apocalyptic or something, we're probably looking at the end of intellectual property as a notion at all before very much longer. The total collapse of the structures of intellectual property. This is part of the acclimatisation of this whole process, but there's nothing we can do about that. It's on its way.
It's very hard to police, isn't it? Because it's worldwide and very hard to prove.
It's like it's easy to write. If you publish your own book now on iTunes or Amazon or whatever, I mean, the notion of a publishing company, 5 years' time, people would say, what's that? Because outside maybe some specialist niches, academia probably is one. But outside that level, if you want to write a book of poetry, you publish a book of poetry. In the same way with music, you want to single out. The only issue is whether you can get people to want to download it and pay for it.
Knowledge is part, but the withholding of knowledge is really powerful. The government is about to announce the publication on the web of science papers from universities, making that a compulsory element. That's knowledge that shouldn't be held back from people. But the argument is people won't understand it properly. It will cause problems. But in a democratic society, the issue is there about the sharing, and it will happen, and it will happen through the web. So yeah, absolutely.
Science is interesting in that amateur scientists have far better status than amateur artists, and they have discovered things. I don't know if that's not the right word, but they are acknowledged for that, whereas amateur artists don't have that same status.
It's much more subjective, isn't it? The label doesn't make any difference to the product. Well, a scientific discovery, it doesn't matter who found it, it's that matters, whereas you don't separate the artist from the product. It's very subjective. So if it's been labelled as an amateur artist, then it's an amateur product in the eyes of many.
I wonder whether we can learn something from the science status, amateur status. And there's a new way of I don't know about separating that artist and the product. I don't know. Because when you get into participatory, then who is the author as well? That's a whole different ball game, isn't it?
Sure.
Who then owns the piece of work if it only exists because there are 20, 30 people involved.
It's an experience, not a thing.
Then it's very different.
I was just thinking, Pamela, you said about maybe we have responsibility to keep abreast of exactly what's happening. I mean, I've learned so much at this stage in terms of stuff that exists online, no idea about. I'm wondering what kind of challenge it's actually going to be in the years to come about. Just phenomenal breadth of stuff that actually is available and that people are creating online, and how is it going to be possible to keep up with it? Is it a realistic?
You use the phrase signposting, and I think that's a very important thing, is because there is such a massive content out there. Nobody is ever going to find their way around it. Somebody has taken responsibility for trying to signpost things into your area of interest. And, for example, we've seen that with some of the websites we looked at today.
Yeah.
Because I think that's probably much in its infancy.
Yeah.
And I think it's possibly something that we could be looking at to do for all our voluntary arts groups, to try to do how you do a best of.
Yeah.
And the interesting selection of the week, so that people actually could learn.
Yeah, I think that practically would be helpful.
Yeah. But also very, very hard to do. That's a challenge.
Twitter does it very effectively. You can do it through Twitter very effectively, very quickly.
Yes.
There's a lot of signposting goes on in Twitter.
Another question at Ecomedia UK. Is there a need for closer integration between existing old school arts and crafts people alongside people that are teaching new technology in schools, etc.? And should this integration be formalised in any way?
Could you read that question again, Daniel?
Yeah. Is there a need for closer integration between existing old school artists and craftspeople and the people that are teaching new technology in schools, universities, etc.? Should this integration be formalised in any way?
The people who are teaching technology in IT and such like in schools are probably working on syllabus that was written 2.5 years ago, which is completely irrelevant. I don't think you can make that kind of connection in any meaningful way in a system that is so far behind the curve with the way the web is developing, the way the technologies are developing now. The kids in classrooms are more clued up than their teachers have always will be. I don't think that works. Well, that's one. As an example of that, I used to teach music in college, and I was trying to teach computer music to kids who knew more than I did, so I got out of it. It was just impossible to keep ahead of that all the time. They were way ahead and quicker than I ever was.
Just a clarification from Kyle. He says he meant on the lines of teaching social media rather than IT as such.
But do they need to be taught? If you talk about your people at school,
maybe it should be the other way around, the kids teaching the teachers.
Well, there's the apprentice model, isn't there, where everybody learns from everybody else. It's not I teach you and I know everything and you know nothing. It's everybody who learns from everybody else.
Maybe that's a more dispersed method of learning, which is happening anyway because of the growth of the internet. So maybe traditional teaching is kind of fade away slightly.
Yeah. Coming back to the conversation we had earlier about the virtual museum, isn't the technology in this case really just the bus that's getting us to the physical museum replaced by a computer and search engines?
The danger, of course, with museums and with galleries who have websites is that you don't have to necessarily then visit the institution. You can see pretty much what they've got on the web, and that to a certain extent replaces then the physical experience of seeing the work of art at first hand, which can be a very different experience in all senses, from scale through to I remember going around the Wikipedia art galleries 20 years ago on my own just before an exhibition was coming up, and realising that actually this particular artist had such a detail in the brushwork that I'd never seen sort of either on the internet or indeed in a crowded exhibition at the same way that appeared in these sites.
Are there any statistics to give us an idea of whether actually having an online gallery has impacted on the businesses?
No, not that I'm aware of. It's an interesting area. Because, I mean, every gallery and museum feels that they have to have an online presence, and yet the physicality of seeing objects in museums, maybe it's something that's so old-fashioned now that we're out of the loop on this. Maybe you don't actually have to see it for the first time.
What happens when we fast forward 10 years or 15 years or whatever to the days when we have holographic projections, because the way things have developed with technology, that's not so far away. Does that render you put the object in store, and the only way, because it keeps it safe, and the only way you see it is via a holographic projection? I know it sounds a bit Star Trek, but it isn't that far away.
But you have things like vinyl was supposed to be going out of fashion, and then tape was supposed to go out. Actually, those are now cutting edge stuff, because people are doing things with those old technologies.
And also,
so they won't ever disappear.
But also computers are mobile now. So if you go to some of the really good museums, acknowledge that you've got these things with you when you stand in front of an artifact, and they don't plaster it with information, and you've got that information as much as you want when you're standing in front of it. And I find that is a much more exciting way to visit a museum than standing there with no pre-knowledge of what you're looking at, just a tiny little caption, 1-2 paragraphs, and then move on to something else.
If the museum doesn't have a digital presence, it reduces its potential to enhance its archive. The V&A have a responsibility for textiles, and they had a gap in 1963. Mary Quant dresses, so tubular, short, smart dresses, and they use their website because they've got a community of interest, and that's something that I think we haven't. There's a phrase we haven't used, but it's a very pertinent phrase. What we're talking about is communities of interest that swirl around in society. It's a community of interest in textiles, in dress design, and so on, which is very significant in Great Britain. Lots of people share it. And but what they did was, instead of just saying, if you've got one of these things, can you send us a picture of it? They said, could you send us a picture of you in your dress in 1963 and tell us where you were and what you were doing? And they've got these lovely pictures of these people on the website now, giving all the information that they needed from their curatorial perspective. But they're saying, I was just about to go to a party on the King's Road, it was great, and you get a whole flavour, a whole era as a result of it. So it's a sort of enhancement of the process. And they would never have met those people, they would never have had that information if they hadn't happened through web processes. So it's something that can't be,
There's a point. The Louvre in Paris has just started giving out Nintendo DS handheld video game consoles to add an interactive element to their exhibition. That's interesting.
It's also possible now to have tablets, people going around with tablets in front of them, so that you see the picture you're looking at. So you're looking at some Renaissance picture, and as it's there on your tablet, and you can touch it, you can move it around, you can turn it upside down, you can touch somebody, and you can find out who they were or where they were. It's only an enhancement, doesn't it? But to get back to your issue, Roland, it enhances the museum visit potentially, rather than makes it not necessary.
Isn't the Louvre engaging in an experimental project with IBM, where IBM has turned the building itself into a computer, so that they're actually able to tell how long people stand in front of each item and where you are, and if you've got your smartphone with you, they know exactly where you are within the building. And so the building is interacting with you, potentially, rather than just passively offering you information. The building could interact and say, okay, you really like this picture, go over here. And I think that's what they're looking at doing.
I think it is still important not to forget, though, that the artist, the craftsperson, etc., actually physically made that, and they made it because it was very tactile. And therefore, when we're talking in terms of seeing things on tablets and seeing things on the internet, you're seeing a flat into it. It is a completely different experience now.
Well, how many use of tablets on the technology? There's it on a tablet and he scales it up basically, so they're
But some of these objects and artifacts are so old you can't touch them anyway. So there's that play to it, and then the technology becomes an enhancement of that. But it's a really key debate. But we see it in Wales here, where we've had it with the People's Collection. in Wales, which is a digital, a process of collecting digital information about places and their history. And the invitation has been for everybody to participate. So you get people, kind of sending in pictures of artifacts or photographs of events occurring and telling people about it and so on. And it's very, very difficult, again, challenging a professional boundary, because you see, some of it may be historically accurate and some of it may not be historically accurate. This is a problem. It's going out on a website associated with the National Museum. We say the National Museum has standards of verification for its objects. And it's no good saying, this is a great story, Jesus carried this thing, unless there's some evidence to suggest that was the case, and there isn't. So this is not without its difficulties. But as I say, I have a feeling that the mixture of what you're talking about, the relationship between culture and technology, is one in which sometimes the technology is ahead. We can do this. We can do this Twitter thing. People say, oh, you could do this. And they did it. They made it available to people. And then people made it do the things it does. If you see what I mean, rather than the other way around. And technology and culture will converse within the cyberspace to resolve these issues about whether or not one experience is being replicated or made redundant by another. I think, probably.
I saw a large international photographic exhibition in London a few months back, and you could see all the entries for photographers from all over the world on the website. But the gallery there was a queue on the block to get in there, so there's no particular reason that you're seeing exactly the same work except on the larger scale.
But is it the online presence that actually draws people to the place itself? So we're now actually reaching potentially much bigger audience.
Can I just ask Robin how we're doing for time? Because I don't want to...
We're doing fine.
Okay,
we might want to be wrapping up in 20 minutes or so. Is there anything we haven't really covered yet, any aspect? Are we guilty of going down one route and ignoring some others?
I think you have to recognise that, and it has been sort of alluded to, that there will be some groups who will not want to engage or are not able to engage with digital technology. Certainly the technology as it stands gives a much wider range of options and opportunities to people. But I think you're also in danger of possibly losing out on certain things. Roland mentioned the difference from actually being there in person as opposed to seeing something on a screen. We've had a number of performances of the MC broadcast across Wales to various sites. And I think whilst those who are attending off-site have appreciated the performance, I think we're the first to admit it was no way comparable to what you're being there and seeing things. And I think for organisations like yourselves at Voluntary Arts Wales, there's going to be a hell of a challenge to balance provision of information and knowledge to voluntary groups, amateur groups, call them what you want, to use this sort of technology, but also take things into account and bearing in mind there will be certain groups that it may not be appropriate to or may not want to go that far. They're just happy doing what they do. And I think you need to be aware of the balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the point I was making earlier on, where some groups, and you said it yourself, they just don't have the capacity or knowledge at present to engage online. And that's one of the things we do is kind of hold people's hands as they take that step. I mean, we do have groups come to us and say, how do I use Twitter, how do I use Facebook, for the viruses or whatever. There's just that fear, I guess, of the unknown out there. And I think that's a responsibility for ourselves to help people on that journey.
Yeah, and provide a motivation in a sense for that engagement, which is probably... There's no doubt. I mean, I suppose I'm interested in a way, how this relates to the existence of organisations and what organisational purposes are, and how some of this cuts across the need for organisational structures and creativity begins to be undermined by this process, because this is dead easy, relatively speaking. There are some technological issues, but once you get them, that does it. Putting it up then communicate with thousands of people that you never communicated with before. This is dead easy, this process. And it's much easier than getting a group of people together and say, will you be the treasurer, and will you be, and we'll have meetings, and we'll protect our purposes, and everything like that around developing, the arts and relationships. So there's a real challenge in this, I think, not just about content of the experience, not just about the art form, but about the way we go about, making things. And I've written down collective action is how the production an organisation to change something and to develop the interest of things. That's harder than to collaborate on the production of something, I think. But now, new, particularly social web tools, allow for new forms of action. I think that's what's one of the things that's interesting that emerged about the kinds of action. I mean, there's the classic story of the woman who lost her phone in New York, and it was I'll save you the detail of it, but basically, people were outraged that this woman had a phone because it had her wedding photographs on it. It was the only ones, for a variety of reasons. There were no photographs of the wedding; they were only in the phone, and it went missing. And basically, it's a sort of detective story through the web. It got plastered on the web. People knew it was there as a story in New York. They lived in the area. They found out where people were, and they actually ended up busting a guy who had stolen the phone. Now that's kind of worrying, because that's and all the rest of it. But there's a potential for the most incredible kinds of direct action and social change in this process as well. So arguing for, or proselytising for, or advocating, as Voluntary Arts Network does, for the amateur arts, there are implications about how we go about doing that, because of the way that the web structures are undermining and challenging the existing organisation of organisations. I have to say,
I think that Craig's point about how you can help guide organisations and artists, with your knowledge and experience of digital technology into using them is something that more needs to be done with, really. And it's also important to sort of not lose sight of the fact that maybe we're tending to think of the internet as something that is very passive. But basically, there's no reason why it can't be interactive. And because interaction, in fact, is the key to why people engage in amateur, voluntary, or indeed professional arts activity, then that is something that needs to be developed. Rather than thinking like you're only going to see something on the screen, actually, how can you interact with them? The same with donkeys years ago. Young people in youth projects would have been doing things like scratch videos and stuff, and sort of chopping bits and pieces off programs and putting them together with bits and mixed in, so handheld video camera, so on. And in terms of us older people, I mean, there's a lot of older people who spend half the night, on the internet because they can't sleep and so on. And there's also the whole area, which I find really interesting, has yet to be sort of developed, of broadcast. Dominic Ryan and A Lifetime on Tiptoes as part of the London Festival broadcast is a really good example of the potential out there. There's no reason why an amateur group, for instance, couldn't actually sort of broadcast a play or something. But yeah, interaction rather than passive consumption. But then, how do you explain the popularity of things like live streaming of opera from the net and stuff? There's huge audiences that will go and see that, because one, it's obviously a hell of a lot cheaper than going to New York, and also because a lot of professional companies never get in Wales beyond Cardiff, and so the big field at the back of Cardiff is the rest of us. never get sort of visits from companies like that.
I mean, this comes back to the point which made earlier about the experience of being at a place like the Level Centre. If it's broadcast out there to satellite venues, that may be the very thing that tempts somebody to go and experience the full thing.
I think it's got something to do with celebrating the community of interest as well. That sometimes you're geographically prevented from attending something like an opera, and you are an opera buff. That's why you go to the opera, because you love it and you want to be there and you can't be there. So because otherwise you watch it on telly. I mean, what's the difference between these live broadcasts and people going to the cinema? It's bigger, it's technically better, but it's not. It's the same thing. But in the cinema, you might be congregating with a group of strangers. When you go to one of these things, you know you're not. You're people alongside you are the picnic-going, opera-loving people that you are yourself. I think that's the way that it works, and that's part of the impulse that's being picked up by creative web processes as well. Yeah.
Just on the point of how organisations can help facilitate this movement towards the digital future, a quick plug for our website, Running Your Group, which is we've launched. There's a combination of linear information. We stream our events, which we're doing today, and we've got e-learning modules. And there's some recent briefings on how voluntary arts groups can easily get into setting up a Facebook page, getting started on Twitter, using YouTube, all explained in easy to understand language. So you're very welcome to come and visit us on there, and the address is www.runningyourgroup.org. And one more question from the web. Has anyone got any examples of how organisations are telling the cultural stories of Wales using digital media?
Digital stories? Yeah. There's one that I know.
BBC Capture Wales is the network.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would go much wider than that. I mean, I think that I think the National Theatre, the new National Theatre of Wales, is telling the cultural story of Wales through Coriolanus and in lots of different ways. I mean, everybody's pumping away on that. There are issues around the language that I think are very important. And again, that's something that the web allows, or the technology should allow for more presence of a diversity of languages in Wales, which is one of its distinguishing cultural features. I mean, looking to enabling diversity is what I would say is one of the key potential contributions here. I feel a conference coming on you. I've got a horrible feeling.
Here speaks the academic.
Yeah. Specifically because that question is a very good question, but it really requires is case studies of these things happening. I would love to get together, or we could have case studies from organisations and the people around attempting to answer that question, because I don't feel particularly capable of answering that question on my own about what Welsh organisations are doing to reflect.
Perhaps it's an online conference.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you put it out there to the rest of Wales and the world.
Yeah.
It's important not to forget we are actually part of the digital history of Wales in terms of people will be looking back perhaps on this broadcast in a few years' time. God, we sat down at a table talking about it. Gosh, that was interesting.
I think it's also this is very metatextual, the whole event, because our broadcast of this is very much amateur. This is a laptop and a webcam and some software you can download from the web. This is not a TV studio.
You mean low key, not amateur?
Well, I mean amateur in the best sense of the word. But believe me, we're not professional broadcasters.
Does anyone belong to any of the Guardian networks, communities of interest? Well, there's a local government network, there's a social workers network. I wonder if that might not be a model to kind of look at, because they have a sort of an occasional blog and a newsletter, but then every once in a while they have an expert sort of round table session, and they'll maybe have 4 people who are particular experts in the area, and they will debate and discuss a particular subject, and then that will be put onto that area of the website. So it's, you can comment live, and you can go on your comment and kind of scrolls down. But the actual discussion and the things that the experts have to say remains, as does the comments. A recent one in the, I think the Culture Professionals Network was, they were asked for their top 10 tips in running a festival. And it was really interesting.
Yeah, if you're interested, that's sort of a phenomenon they're calling webinars.
Is that what they call
webinars now? There's I'm familiar with one. There's a National Council on Creative Aging in the USA that does a program of those things where you can sign up as a member and go in online and listen to the discussion and contribute very much the way that we're doing here, but they do it through Skype. So there's a visual content as well. You can see the people who are attending. It takes a bit more professional to use.
I was involved in the Guardian Culture Professionals chat last Friday, actually, which was about Creative Scotland. And being on the panel is quite scary, because everybody else seems to type and think much faster. So I sort of read the first 2 comments, and I'm trying to think of my answer, and there's 5 other comments coming through, and I kind of feel I'm always chasing to keep up. So if you ever see me on there, you'll see that I just paste in some pre-prepared comments that have nothing to do with the rest of the discussion. It's quite intimidating in a way, but interesting phenomenon.
Well, the use of Skype now means that it's real time audio and visual.
Yeah.
If you've got the infrastructure to handle it, it's just like a video conferencing.
That's what we're doing now.
The use of the word expert is really good because that cuts across amateur and professional, because you can be an expert and be paid for it or not be paid for it. It's got a good status.
I'm wondering now whether, including the excellent contributions we've had from people who are not physically present here, we could begin to think about wrapping this session up. But there may be 1 or 2 comments that people want to make before we finish, as far as possibly looking at if this conversation is worth taking forward and how we might take it forward at all, or not.
I think that this whole area is a little bit like Wild West at the moment. There aren't very clear boundaries in this area at the moment, and I think it probably does require somebody or an organisation to above the parapet. Maybe that's what it does. In this sense, it requires somebody to put their head above the parapet and actually make some of the contentious statements, throw things out there for people to respond to. This has been interesting, but there's probably as many people, twice as many people who ought to be around the table who are online, because there ought to be a lot of people more interested in this. And maybe it does need somebody to just boldly go, etc., and see where it goes.
Well, I'd like to add that. I hope this does go forward. It fits, I think, very strongly with the way forward, from my experience, that's happening there with the arts in Wales in particular, in enabling access and participation, and I think it's going to play a key role.
We've just lost part of our audience who's gone off to read the Guardian top tips on running a festival. Thanks for that.
Was it right in the news yesterday? Is it the Assembly have a special deal with BT that by 2014, 94% of the population will have access to high-speed broadband? 2050. Is it 2050?
That's good. I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you.
So, welcome to everybody, and we will hear from us as this progresses. This has been a useful thing and very different from the kinds of forums that we've had before, the Voluntary Arts Network. So I'm very grateful to you all for your contribution. We'll take these things away and cogitate on what we do next. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How has it been different from other?
Well, I'm new to this, chairing the Voluntary Arts Network, but there are issues around the organisational structure of voluntary arts that have this body acting partly, as I was saying earlier, as a steering group for the work of Voluntary Arts Network. So that's work that probably needs to continue to be done elsewhere. But this has been a single issue focused event, so that's how it's been different, really.